Even before an off-world traveler was close enough to understand why, he could tell that Coruscant was different from other planets. Seasoned veterans were always amazed at how strange the planet looked from space, casting not the softer blue and white shades of planets still verdant and unspoiled, but an odd silvery glow that suggested the reflection of sunlight off metal. The impression was not misleading. The days in which Coruscant could be viewed in any sort of natural state were dead and gone. The capital city had expanded over the centuries, building by building, until it wrapped the entire planet. Forests, mountains, bodies of water, and natural formations had been covered over. The atmosphere was filtered through oxygen regulators and purified by scrubbers, and water was gathered and stored in massive artificial aquifers. Native animals, birds, plants, and fish could be found in the museums or the climate-controlled indoor preserves. As Anakin Skywalker could clearly see from the viewport of Queen Amidala's slowly descending transport, Coruscant had become a planet of skyscrapers, their gleaming metal towers stretching skyward in a forest of spear points, an army of frozen giants blanketing the horizon in every direction. The boy stared at the city planet in awe, searching for a break in the endless forest of buildings, finding none. He glanced at Reek Ollier in the pilot seat, and Reek smiled. Coruscant, capital of the Republic, an entire planet evolved into one city. He winked. A nice place to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there. It's so huge, the boy breathed softly. They dropped into a landfall traffic lane and cruised slowly through the maze of buildings, sliding along the magnetic guidance lanes that directed airborne vehicles. Reek explained how it worked to Anakin, who listened with half an ear, his attention still held captive by the vastness of the cityscape. In the background, the Jedi moved slowly. Jar Jar crouched to one side, peering over the console through the viewport, clearly terrified by what he was seeing. Anakin knew the Gungan must long for the familiarity of his swamp home, just as the boy was thinking how much better he liked the desert. The Queen's transport slowed now, edging its way out of the traffic lane onto a landing dock that floated near a cluster of huge buildings. Anakin peered down doubtfully. They were several hundred stories up, hundreds and hundreds of meters in the air. He tore his gaze away, swallowing hard. The ship docked with a soft bump on the landing platform, its anti-grav clamps locking in place. The Queen was waiting in the main corridor with her retinue of handmaidens, guards, and Captain Panaka. She nodded at Qui-Gon, indicating that he should lead the way. Giving Padme a quick smile, Anakin followed close on the heels of the Jedi Master as he moved to the hatchway. The hatch slid open, the loading ramp lowered, and the Jedi Knights, Anakin Skywalker and Jar Jar Binks exited into the sunlight of Coruscant. The boy spent the first few minutes concentrating on not being overwhelmed, which became even more difficult once he was outside the ship. He kept his eyes on the rampway and Qui-Gon, not allowing himself to look around at first for fear he might walk right off into space. Two men clothed in robes of Office of the Republic Senate stood at the end of the ramp, flanked by a contingent of Republic guards. The Jedi approached the pair and bowed formally in greeting. Anakin and Jar Jar were quick to do the same, though only Anakin knew who they were bowing to and why. Now Queen Amidala appeared, dressed in her black and gold robes with the feathered headpiece lending height and flow to her movements as she descended the ramp. Her handmaidens surrounded her, wrapped in their cloaks of crimson, faces barely visible in the shadows of their drawn hoods. Captain Panaka and his complement of Naboo guards escorted them. Amidala stopped before the two men who waited, eyes shifting to the man with the kindly face and anxious eyes. Senator Palpatine, the Queen's emissary to the Republic Senate, bowed in welcome, hands clasped in the folds of his blue-green robes. "It is a great relief to see you alive and well, Your Majesty," he offered with a smile, straightening once more. "May I present Supreme Chancellor Valorum." Valorum was a tall, silver-haired man of intermediate age, neither young nor old in appearance, but something of each. His bearing and voice strong, but his face and startling blue eyes tired and worried. "Welcome, Your Highness," he said, a faint smile working its way onto his stern features. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person. I must relay to you how distressed everyone is over the current situation on Naboo. I have called for a special session of the Senate so that you may present your request for relief." The Queen held his gaze without moving even a fraction of a centimeter, tall and regal in her robes of office, white painted face as still and cool as ice. "I am grateful for your concern, Chancellor," she said quietly. Out of the corner of his eye, Anakin recognized Padme staring out at him from beneath her concealing hood. When he turned toward her, she gave him a wink, and he felt himself blush. Palpatine had moved to the Queen's side and was indicating an air shuttle that was awaiting them. "There is a question of procedure, but I feel confident we can overcome it," he was saying, guiding her along the rampway, her handmaidens, Captain Panaka and the Naboo guards in tow. Anakin started to follow, Jar Jar at his side. Then stopped as he saw that the Jedi were still standing with Supreme Chancellor Valorum. Anakin glanced back questioningly at Qui-Gon, not certain where he was supposed to go. The Queen and her retinue slowed in response, and Amidala motioned for Anakin and the Gungan to join them. Anakin looked again at Qui-Gon, who nodded wordlessly. Moving into the air shuttle with the Queen, Anakin and Jar Jar settled quietly into place in the very back seat. Senator Palpatine glanced over his shoulder at them from the front, a look of skepticism crossing his face before he turned away again. "Listen, not feeling too good about being here, Annie," the Gungan whispered doubtfully. Anakin nodded and tightened his mouth determinedly. They flew only a short distance to another cluster of buildings and another loading dock, this one clearly meant for shuttlecraft. There, they disembarked and were escorted by Palpatine to his quarters, a portion of which had been made ready for the Queen and her entourage. Anakin and Jar Jar were given a room and a chance to clean up and were left alone. After a time, they were collected by one of the handmaidens, not Padme, Anakin noted with disappointment, and escorted to a waiting room situated outside what appeared to be Palpatine's office. "Wait here," the handmaiden instructed, and disappeared back down the hallway. The doors to the senator's office were open, and the boy and the Gungan could see inside clearly. The Queen was present, dressed now in a gown of purple velvet, which was wrapped about her slim form in layers, the sleeves long and full, hanging gracefully from her slender arms. A fan-shaped crown with ornate beadwork and tassels rested upon her head. She was sitting in a chair, listening as Palpatine spoke to her. Her handmaiden stood to one side, crimson robes and hoods drawn close about them. Anakin did not think either was Padme. He wondered if he should try to find her instead of waiting here, but he did not know where to look. The conversation within seemed decidedly one-sided. Senator Palpatine gesturing animatedly as he stalked the room, the Queen as still as stone. Anakin wished he could hear what was being said. He glanced at Jar Jar, and he could tell from the Gungan's restless eyes he was thinking the same thing. When Captain Panaka walked past them and entered the room beyond, screening them from view for just a moment, Anakin rose impulsively. Motioning for Jar Jar to stay where he was, putting a finger to his lips in warning, he moved to one side of the doorway, pressing close. Through the crack between the open door and the jamb, he could just make out the voices of Palpatine and the Queen, muffled and indistinct. Palpatine had stopped moving and was standing before the Queen, shaking his head. "The Republic is not what it once was. The Senate is full of greedy, squabbling delegates who are only looking out for themselves and their home systems. There is no interest in the common good, no civility, only politics." He sighed wearily. "It's disgusting. I must be frank, Your Majesty. There is little chance the Senate will act on the invasion." Amidala was silent a moment. "Chancellor Valorum seems to think there is hope." "If I may say so, Your Majesty," the senator replied, his voice kind but sad. "The Chancellor has little real power. He is mired in baseless accusations of corruption. A manufactured scandal surrounds him. The bureaucrats are in charge now. The Queen rose, standing tall and fixed before him. What options do we have, Senator? Palpatine seemed to think on the matter for a moment. Our best choice would be to push for the election of a stronger Supreme Chancellor, one who could take control of the bureaucrats, enforce the laws, and give us justice. He brushed back his thick hair, whirring his forehead with steepled fingers. You could call for a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum. Amidala did not seem convinced. Valorum has been our strongest supporter. Is there no other way? Palpatine stood before her. Our only other choice would be to submit the matter to the courts. There is no time for that, the Queen interrupted quickly, a hint of anger in her voice. The courts take even longer to decide things than the Senate. She shifted purposefully, an edge sharpening her words further. Our people are dying, more and more each day. We must do something quickly. We must stop the Trade Federation before this gets any worse. Palpatine gave Amidala a stern look. To be realistic about the matter, Your Highness, I believe we are going to have to accept Trade Federation control as an accomplished fact. For the time being, at least. The Queen shook her head slowly. That is something I cannot do, Senator. They faced each other in the silence that followed, eyes locked, and Anakin Skywalker, hiding behind the door without, found himself wondering suddenly what had become of Qui-Gon Jinn. Unlike other buildings in the vast sprawl of Coruscant, the Jedi Temple stood alone, a colossal pyramid with multiple spires rising skyward from its flat top. It sat apart from everything at the end of a broad promenade, linking it with bulkier, sharper-edged towers in which solitude and meditation were less likely to be found. Within the temple were housed the Jedi Knights and their students, the whole of the Order engaged in contemplation and study of the Force, in codification of its dictates and mastery of its disciplines, and in training to serve the greater good it embodied. The Jedi Council Room dominated a central portion of the complex. The council itself was in session, its doors closed, its proceedings hidden from the eyes and ears of all but 14 people. 12 of them, some human, some non-human, comprised the council, a diverse and seasoned group who had gravitated to the Order from both ends of the galaxy. The final 2 Jedi, who were guests of the council this afternoon, were Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The seats of the 12 council members formed a circle facing inward to where Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan stood, the former relating the events of the past few weeks, the latter a step behind his master, listening attentively. The room was circular and domed, supported by graceful pillars spaced between broad windows open to the city and the light. The shape of the room and the council seating reflected the Jedi belief in the equality of and interconnection between all things. In the world of the Jedi, the balance of life within the Force was the pathway to understanding and peace. Qui-Gon studied the faces of his listeners as he spoke, each of them familiar to him. Most were Jedi Masters like himself. Among them, Yoda and Mace Windu, seniors in rank among those seated. They were more compliant in the ways of the Jedi Order than he had ever been or would probably ever be. He stood apart in the mosaic circle that formed a speaker's platform for those who addressed the council, his tall, broad form and deep voice commanding the attention of those gathered, his blue eyes fixing them each in turn, constantly searching for a reaction to his words. They watched him carefully. Stately Ki Adi-Mundi, young and beautiful Adi Gallia, slender Depa Bilaba, crested and marble-faced Even Piel, and all the others, each different and unique in appearance. Each with something vital to offer as a representative of the council. Qui-Gon brought his eyes back to Mace Windu and Yoda, the ones he must convince, the ones most respected and powerful of those who sat in judgment. My conclusion, he finished quietly, his story completed, is that the one who attacked me on Tatooine is a Sith Lord. The silence that followed was palpable. Then, there was a stirring of brown robes, a shifting of bodies and limbs. Glances were exchanged and murmurs of disbelief quickly voiced. "A Sith Lord?" Mace Windu repeated with a growl, leaning forward. He was a strong, dark-skinned man with a shaved head and penetrating eyes, smooth-faced despite his years. "Impossible!" Ki-Adi-Mundi snapped irritably, not bothering to hide his dismay at the suggestion. "The Sith had been gone for a millennium." Yoda shifted only slightly in his chair, a small and wizened presence in the company of much larger beings, his eyes gone to slits like a contented sand panther's, his whiskery, wrinkled face turned toward Qui-Gon's thoughtfully. "Threatened, the Republic is, if the Sith are involved," he observed in his soft, gravely voice. The others began to mutter anew among themselves. Qui-Gon said nothing, waiting them out. They had believed the Sith destroyed. They had believed them consumed by their own lust for power. He could feel Obi-Wan shift uncomfortably at his shoulder, having trouble maintaining his silence. Mace Windu leaned back heavily, his strong brow furrowing. "This is difficult to accept, Qui-Gon. I do not understand how the Sith could have returned without us knowing." "Hard to see. The dark side is," Yoda said with a small snort. "Discover who this assassin is. We must." "Perhaps he will reveal himself again," Ki-Adi-Mundi suggested with a nod to Qui-Gon. "Yes," Mace Windu agreed. "This attack was with purpose. That much is clear. The Queen is his target. Since he failed once, he may try again." Yoda lifted one skinny arm, pointing at Qui-Gon. "With this Naboo Queen, you must stay, Qui-Gon. Protect her, you must." The others murmured their approval, evidencing the confidence they felt in the Jedi Master's abilities. Still, Qui-Gon said nothing. "We shall use all our resources to unravel this mystery and discover the identity of your attacker," Mace Windu advised, one hand lifted in dismissal. "May the Force be with you, Qui-Gon Jinn." "May the Force be with you," Yoda echoed. Obi-Wan turned to leave. He stopped when Qui-Gon did not follow, but instead remained standing before the council. Obi-Wan held his breath, knowing what was coming. Yoda cocked his head questioningly. "More to say, have you, Qui-Gon Jinn?" "With your permission, my master," the Jedi replied, gaze steady. "I have encountered a vergence in the Force." Yoda's eyes widened slightly. "A vergence, you say?" "Located around a person?" Mace Windu asked quickly. Qui-Gon nodded. "A boy. His cells have the highest concentration of midichlorians I have ever seen in a life form." He paused. "It is possible he was conceived by midichlorians." There was a shocked silence this time. Qui-Gon Jinn was suggesting the impossible, that the boy was conceived not by human contact, but by the essence of all life, by the connectors to the Force itself, the midichlorians. Comprising collective consciousness and intelligence, the midichlorians formed the link between everything living and the Force. But there was more that troubled the Jedi Council. There was a prophecy so old its origins had long since been lost, that a chosen one would appear, imbued with an abundance of midichlorians, a being strong with the Force and destined to alter it forever. It was Mace Windu who gave voice to the Council's thoughts. "You refer to the prophecy," he said quietly, "of the one who will bring balance to the Force. You believe it is this boy?" Qui-Gon hesitated. "I don't presume—" "But you do!" Yoda snapped challengingly. "Revealed your opinion is, Qui-Gon." The Jedi Master took a deep breath. "I request the boy be tested." Again, there was silence as the members of the council exchanged glances, communicating without words. Eyes shifted back to Qui-Gon. "To be trained as a Jedi, you request for him?" Yoda asked softly. "Finding him was the will of the Force." Qui-Gon pressed ahead recklessly. "I have no doubt of it. There is too much happening here for it to be anything else." Mace Windu held up one hand, bringing the debate to a close. "Bring him before us, then. Yoda nodded somberly, eyes closing.
Tested, he will be.
It is time to be going, Your Majesty, Senator Palpatine advised, moving to gather up a pile of data cards from his desk. Queen Amidala rose, and Anakin hurried back to a seat beside Jar Jar, giving the Gungan another warning glance for good measure. Jar Jar looked hurt.
Misa not gonna tell them,
he protested. A moment later, Palpatine ushered the Queen and her handmaidens from his office and into the antechamber, where the boy and the Gungan sat waiting. The senator went by them without a glance and was out the door immediately. Queen Amidala slowed just a fraction as she passed Anakin. "Why don't you come with us?" the handmaiden Rebay said without looking at him, her voice a whisper. "This time, you won't have to listen from behind a door." Anakin and Jar Jar exchanged a startled, chagrined look, then rose and followed after.